Okay, good afternoon everybody, and welcome back to many of you for this session on civil service reform. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Bronwyn Hill, the Permanent Secretary at the Department for Environment, Food and for Rural Affairs. And I have very great pleasure today in introducing our main speaker for this session, Sir Bob Kerslake, the Head of the Civil Service. As many of you know, Sir Bob has been the Permanent Secretary at the Department for Communities and Local Government since 2010. And he became head of the whole of the Civil Service just over a year ago in January 2012. Before that, he had a very illustrious career, in particular as Chief Executive of one of our largest city councils, not far from here in Sheffield. Since his appointment, Sir Bob has led a huge amount of work with leaders and with people from across the civil service to set the shape for the civil service reform plan. So a year and a half on from that plan, and in the light of everything that has happened since then, we want to hear from Sir Bob about his thoughts on where we are and about the challenges we still face and how the civil service can best equip itself to be exceptional from now on. Sir Bob Kerslake.
To see so many of you here today, and it's great to be at what is the first of our Be Exceptional events. I've just come from an hour of fascinating examination of the hubs to see what they're doing. I saw the Rural Payments Agency complete with carrots. They've moved the online take-up of their services from 34% to over 50%. I successfully completed, and this is a relief, the rehabilitation programme. I saw a brilliant partnership in the work that's being done between HMRC and the Prince's Trust to improve skills and to help young people. And last but very definitely not least, I saw the work being done to strengthen operational delivery through the operational delivery programme, much of which is being done online. Together, these hubs demonstrate the excellence and innovation of civil servants. Those involved in them should be very proud about what they've achieved. And I thought it'd be good to show our appreciation for everyone who's put together the hubs. If you could do that for me, thank you. Today I want to talk to you about the radical way in which we are transforming how we do things through civil service reform. It's a story that rarely gets told in the media, but it's no less important for this. If we're going to continue to deliver excellent services for the public, whilst undertaking a huge programme of reform in justice, education, health, to name but a few, we must continue to embrace reform. It's a year since we published the reform plan, and soon we'll be publishing the 1 year on progress report, setting out honestly what we've achieved. But the most common questions I get asked as head of the civil service are why reform and what are the benefits? So today I want to focus my talk on why reform's good for Britain, why reform is good for the civil service, and why it's good for you. Before that, though, I should mention an email that I sent out a few weeks ago asking people what subjects they'd like me to cover in my speech today. Civil servants from around the country gave me many ideas on all sorts of subjects. Tim in the Highways Agency, for example, encouraged me to use baseball statistics to improve performance, whilst Chris in DEFRA talked about launching a minor projects academy alongside the major projects academy. Getting out and about and listening to civil servants direct has been a key part of the job. Hearing from the silent army, as one emailer described them to me, which is why in the past 18 months I've visited over 50 departments and agencies, from Southampton to Scotland, Sheffield to Stockholm, including York and Long Benton, where many of you work. In the rest of my speech, I'll refer to more of the emails I received. Let me start, though, with why reform is good for Britain. Reform will improve public services. On a daily basis, thousands of people receive services from the civil service, in Job Centre Plus, at borders, paying tax, renewing driver's licences, in courts, and rather less often, fortunately, in prisons. They expect a high-quality service delivered in a modern way. Our challenge is to do this at the same time as we are reducing cost. The reform plan sets out a clear ambition to make services more focused on the public, more digital and simpler. And in particular, we're making significant investments in digital services. For instance, I saw recently how the Ministry of Justice are making the lasting power of attorney application into a simple online process instead of a complicated paper one. Each department has produced a plan to harness the power of digital technology to transform their services. There are digital champions in each department and 25 exemplar projects, of which the example I referred to in MOJ is just one. HMRC, which I know a large number of you work in, have recently announced a £200 million investment programme to move decisively to digital service delivery. The bulk of the public form their views of the civil service from the direct services that we deliver. And reform enables us to dramatically improve their experience whilst reducing costs at the same time. Reform will also help us contribute to reducing the deficit. As you'll have seen from the spending review last week, the government is taking further steps to make savings and reduce the deficit. It's already clear, though, that this task will not be completed in 2015-16, but will carry on beyond this. Your hard work has already achieved a remarkable £10 billion in annual savings through procurement, through staff savings, through rigorously managed projects, through digital transformation. But we will need to go further. It's really important, though, that we deliver these savings through increased efficiency and changing the way we work, and not simply pedalling faster on the hamster wheel. We want to become smaller, but also stronger. Efficiency is therefore being hardwired into all parts of the civil service through initiatives such as the Red Tape Challenge. Despite what we've already achieved, there is scope to go further. An email I received from Sue at the Home Office, for example, suggested how we can reduce IT spending by removing big contingencies from contracts. It's an idea that I'm certainly going to follow up. Reform will also ensure that we are unrelentingly focused on growth. All departments are now concentrating on how they can promote economic growth, the most pressing issue facing this country. Whilst ultimately it's private business that will drive growth, the civil service should be there to provide the right incentives, remove barriers, and generally understand what it can do to promote prosperity. Reform is ensuring we do this by changing the way we do procurement, opening up government so that SMEs can get government contracts. Our open approach to policy making means that we can build in the needs of business right from the off. I want to move on, secondly, to why reform is good for the civil service. Reform will make us a more unified organisation. The civil service has historically been a federal body with largely independent departments rarely joining up. By becoming more unified, we will be more consistent and coherent, duplication will be reduced, and people will be able to move more easily between departments. We can achieve this through sharing our services, But it's not just restricted to the back office functions. We're already making great strides to create a single legal service, and policy making will also become more collaborative. The Troubled Families Programme, which last week received a £200 million spending boost, is a good example of joined-up policy working across government departments and with local government. Above all, being more unified will allow us to improve quicker, taking the best across the civil service and making it the standard. Reform will also give us increased capability. One of our historic weaknesses has been uneven professional skills. In areas like HR and finance, we have come on in leaps and bounds over the last decade. But in other areas, we have lagged behind, which is why we published the Capabilities Plan earlier this year. In particular, we need to improve capability on commercial, digital, project management and leadership of change. This will mean that we are better equipped to cope with the complex projects, large digital programs, and difficult organisational changes we're faced with. Above all, we need to grow great leaders. As Olivia at CLG emailed in to say, it is not just finance leaders who need to understand commercial issues, it is the whole of the civil service. Having produced the first ever capabilities plan, we now need to go about implementing it. Reform will also make us more open. This means becoming more transparent and accountable. We are living in an age when public expects not just their politicians, but their officials to be more responsive and accessible. There are clear examples where we're already doing this through reform of our social media, our reports on major projects, our commitment to open data, and the publication of Permanent Secretary objectives. Another example of this is our What Works centres, which bring together rigorous assessment processes to identify the best policy ideas. But we must also be more open to interchange and secondments to businesses, charities, and the wider public sector. This is why we'll be introducing a new cross-government programme to promote this later in the year. We want people to go out and learn from the best and then bring it back into the civil service. Whitehall certainly doesn't always know best. My third and final area is why reform is good for you. Reform will give you better skills. Already we have a huge talent in the civil service, but I know that many people think we can and should do more. Sue from Justice emailed and talked about strengthening qualifications for policy professions. Whether it's operational or policy, all professions will benefit from an increased professionalism across the civil service. The reform plan places a very high priority on learning and development. Every civil servant is now entitled to a minimum 5 days training a year. It's important to say that training is not just formal training, but shadowing, job swaps and volunteering are all part of enhancing your skills. The creation of civil service learning provides us with a very powerful resource to support our commitment to becoming more skilled. I'd encourage every one of you here today to take up the learning and development opportunities available to you. Reform will also ensure that your good performance is recognised and poor performance is tackled. The new performance framework introduced across the civil service is, in my view, a major advance. We know that pay is going to remain challenging in the coming years, but through better performance management, we can recognise the best performers and give them development opportunities, and we can tackle those who are not performing well. We're opening up appointments across government, and with the Common Competency Framework, we can set out clearly the skills and competencies that we need at each level of the civil service. And we're breaking down barriers between departments so that you can move between them more easily. If you get promoted now when you're on loan, you won't have to go through the whole process again when you get back to your old department. And for those like you in this room who work outside London, having the opportunity to move between jobs across the civil service in your area should open up new opportunities. Finally, reform will allow you to work in better, more modern and flexible ways. I can't promise Google-style campus buildings with swimming pools, and I'm not committing to do so, or the Mail would certainly pick me up. But I am committing that by 2015, we will have IT and communications technologies that are usable and work just as well whether you're in the office or away from the office. A variety of well-designed workplaces, such as shared hubs, safe and simplified security and access arrangements, and I saw a presentation on that as well today, and managers who support their staff to work flexibly and productively. Put simply, we spend too much of our lives in work not to have decent accommodation, flexible working and properly functioning IT. We won't be able to change this overnight, but I'm very determined to deliver this commitment. So I hope you've got from what I've said a flavour of why, despite the challenges we face on pay and pensions, civil service reform is good for the country, good for the civil service and good for you. In the end, successful reform is going to come down to the combined effort of every individual single civil servant. So I wanted to finish with 3 asks of you. First, that you look at the exceptional examples being shown here today and share with your colleagues something exceptional that you're doing. Secondly, that you get involved in civil service reform. This is your chance to influence the future of the civil service, to make a difference in an institution that I know many of you are very proud to work for. Thirdly, that you lead by example and are decisive in everything you do. We have a big agenda for change, and we want to deliver it with pace and energy. If we can do all this, we will be an exceptional civil service, delivering the best for Britain. Thank you.
Could I say a huge thank you on behalf of all of us in the hall today to Sir Bob for that fascinating and very wide-ranging set of issues for us. I think it really brought home to me how relevant civil services reform is for all of us here today. And I hope it's going to stimulate you all to offer us your ideas and some thoughts and some questions which Sir Bob has agreed to take. Now, there are some roving mics, so if you have a question for Sir Bob, or you have a thought or a contribution that you'd like to make, please just put up your hand and someone with a microphone will get to you shortly. I'd like to take a couple of questions at a time, so please think of it. This is your big opportunity to ask the questions you've always wanted to ask of the head of the civil service. Whilst you're all thinking about that, perhaps I could kick off, Bob. Earlier this morning I was introducing a bit of an Olympic theme, so if I could be so bold as to say, if you had to give civil service reform a medal 1 year on, bronze, silver or gold, what colour would it be? And tell us why you think it is.
Right, thank you for that, Bronwyn, for the easy first question. What I'd say to you is I think we've achieved a lot in the first year, so I would probably put it in the silver category. Why do I say that? Well, first of all, we've made some big advances introducing the new performance management regime that I referred to. I think the competency framework, for the first time, being able to say across the civil service, what are the skills and capabilities we need at different levels, I think is really important. Later on in July, we're going to launch the talent development program to advance skills and development there. The capabilities plan is crucial. We now have a clear set of priorities, the 4 priorities I spoke about to improve our capabilities. So these are really big things that we've done, alongside, of course, all the huge change that's gone on in departments to improve efficiency and drive up performance. So a lot, I think, to feel very pleased about. But we've got a stage further to go. We've got to make sure that all those plans and policies now have real impact on the ground for every civil servant. And we're not there yet on that. There's more to do on that. So overall, I think silver is about the right colour.
Great. Okay, good. Anyone else got any questions out there for Sir Bob? This is your big opportunity.
I've got the mic. It's Tom from Biz. Can I, first of all, thank Sir Bob for coming up to the North East and visiting us. It's great to see the visibility up here, and we'd like to see more of that. I suppose the point we make in terms of one of your key challenges is joining up policy making across departments, which is obviously going to be a key. I know you yourself and part of when you used to have an integrated government office, which tried to join up policy making. How, as we move forward, are going to avoid the mistakes that we made with that, and crucially join up not just operational policy thinking among civil servants, but join up thinking around the ministers that we work towards.
Okay, should I take that question and then see if there's another one, or should I just take that one first of all?
Take that. I think that was 3 questions for the price of one, if I was counting correctly.
Yes. Good question.
Okay, well,
let's start with the joining up of policy, which I see as fundamental, by the way. So I referred to the Troubled Families Initiative, which is trying to take our most troubled families in this country and deal with the underlying issues for those families. What typically happens is that the problems they experience at any point in time are dealt with, but you don't get to the heart of what's causing the underlying difficulties. So we have a program now that's working across health, working with local government, working with the police to turn around those families. And the effect of that, if we succeed, is we reduce effectively the demands on services. But to make it work, you've absolutely got to collaborate across government departments. A piece of work's been led on what we're calling open policy making, which is to open up the way in which we develop policy, to have the default, if you like, that we work collaboratively rather than it being kind of the thing we might do at the end of the process of doing the thinking. We, as part of that, are thinking about, do we create some capacity that works across departments to encourage more collaborative policy making, a small team, if you like, at the centre of government to do that. So I think that's kind of one way we are going to really shift the way in which we do policy making. And a lot of work has been developed, some online learning tools on this. Second thing I'd say is that I think the government office actually did some good work. I would not say, the government offices were, in my view, something that didn't achieve a lot. But their challenge was always how did they could kind of see the problems about joining things up, but they couldn't always make an impact back in Whitehall. And I think we've got to kind of turn it the other way round and get people from Whitehall out to work with projects on the ground. That's what we did for the community budgets pilots. We actually took on these out into, in fact, Manchester. We also did one in Essex and with 3 other London authorities to work directly on the ground and help influence policy making, if you like, at the source. So I think there's a lot still to do. I feel passionately from my days as a chief executive of a local authority that we can improve the way policy making is done in government. But I think there's some really encouraging initiatives on the way, of which I've just spoken about a couple, really.
Thank you, Bob. If I could add one of my own, I think it's incumbent on all of us to think about the connections and links between things that might not seem very connected when you first think about them. So my favourite example, which you may have heard about today, is there is a very strong link between what DWP are doing around universal credit and what DEFRA is doing around rural payments agency and paying farmers subsidies under common agricultural policy. And the link is how we're using today's technology in an agile way to develop systems, to test them out with customers as we go along, but also how we're controlling the spend on those programs as we're going along. There's some really big challenges there. The policies might not be the same, but the way you have to move from policy into delivery and customer testing has lots of analogies. So I think it is right for those of us who work on these programs to think, are there other things that the civil service is doing where I'm only a phone call away from someone who's facing a similar challenge from me? So I think there's a lot we can do to contribute. Okay, I've got time for a few more questions. Yes, lady at the front. Has anyone else currently got a mic? Because I can't actually see when you have. So if you have, just give me a wave. Stand up, say who you are, and ask your question. Okay, we'll take 2 this time. So short, sharp questions, please. Yes.
I was just at the presentation from HMRC, and we heard about the £200 million improvement programme as well. Can you tell us how, because we were told there that they will have to report back to you, Sir Bob. Can you tell us how this supervision or being held to account will work exactly, what the mechanisms will be, what the details are of the plan, and why we're only doing it now?
Okay, so something about accountability and how reporting on a major programme of change gets right back to the head of the civil service. Okay, I think there was one at the back. Yeah.
I'm Tim from DCLG. We're working very hard to deliver the reform plan, but we listened to the words used in the spending review last week and the press coverage and knocking civil servants again, and just wondered how we remained motivated to carry on.
Yeah, fantastic question. So a question about, given the spending reductions that we're about to see in 15-16 and some of the knocking copy that we've seen in the press, how can we motivate ourselves to continue to deliver for the future?
Shall I come to the first question about supervision of projects? I think it's a fair question, actually. I think we've learned, I guess, in government that we do some projects incredibly well. So the Olympics would be a good example. Big, major, complex project led by government and achieved brilliantly well. Similarly, a much smaller example I would pick out is the search and rescue contract done by DFT. Major project done incredibly well. Another example in HMRC, real achievement to get performance standards up to the levels you have done in kind of response to telephone inquiries, for example. The difficulty we face is that achievement, that really powerful achievement, gets wiped out, if you like, if we have one big failure, one big implementation failure. You'll all have heard of the West Coast Main Line as an example. Undoubtedly, that impacted on the civil service, impacted on people's view of us. So we're putting a lot more effort into working and tracking the big projects. So a big part of that is the Major Projects Academy, which is tracking the top biggest projects in government. We've also created the Major Projects the Major Projects Authority, the Major Projects Leadership Academy, which is training people on projects. And alongside that, we're putting in more regular review through myself and through the Cabinet Secretary, Jeremy Hayward. And what we're seeking to do there is to meet regularly with departments that are undertaking big change programs and just assess how they're going, what the progress is, where the challenges are, what's happening at the centre of government that's helping or getting in the way, basically. I think this is just good discipline, really, and we're getting the advice from the Major Projects Authority into our meetings, so that we've got an independent view in as well. And I think that'll be good for the projects, but it'll give them a bit of internal challenge, and it'll be good for the civil service because we've got less risk of projects going wrong, and that, in a sense, damaging or affecting the perceptions when we do an awful lot really well. So that's my first point. On this question about keeping up morale, I absolutely take your point. It is difficult when people experience reductions in numbers and pay and so on. And you're also right to say, though, that people often talk to me less about those things because I guess they understand that's happening across the whole of the public sector and I guess actually in a lot of the private sector. But they do challenge the coverage we get, the constant attack we get in some of the papers. And I absolutely think we do need to push back on that. When I see things that are inaccurate, I go back personally and challenge it with the papers. Doesn't make me very popular with them sometimes, but I think it's the right thing to do here. Because we should be willing to take criticism when things go wrong, but we should also be prepared to challenge when things are unfair and inaccurate. But what I would say to you is that we have in the civil service the potential to have 414,000 champions. Each one of you in this room has the ability to say what you do in the civil service and talk about it positively to your friends and family when you're saying what you do at work. We have a lot of ambassadors in the civil service who can counter those stories. So whilst I think it's unlikely I'm going to get a front page of the Daily Mail that says civil service brilliant achievements, if I do, I'll probably retire at that point because it isn't going to get any bigger than that. We can do things to push back on that sort of comment, that kind of gratuitous and stupid comment that comes out. And we can ourselves be ambassadors with our colleagues and with our family and friends about what we do and what we do brilliantly.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Now, I think we've got a mic down here, so and then I've got someone on the balcony. Whether or not they have a mic, I don't know, but I'll ask them to shout in a minute. So I take the question from down here in the stalls.
Jerry Carpenter from the National Planning Casework Unit, which is part of DCLG. I'm very concerned about the proposals to include a geographical flexibility clause in posts involving promotion, and in my view that's a major disincentive for staff working in the provinces to apply for promotion if there's a real risk that in a few months' time you could be sent to work on the south coast.
Okay, question about geographical mobility, and I don't know whether you can project from the balcony. If
you can hear me, then it should be fine.
We can.
Good. I'd just like to ask how are preparations going ahead of the Scottish referendum, and have we basically put enough time and effort in place to make sure the service continues as usual should the changeover actually occur?
Okay, thank you. Very interesting question about the Scottish referendum. Are we ready, I think is the question. Bob.
Right, two questions there. I think on the mobility clause, what we're not suggesting here that we can just move people randomly at will from the north of the country to the south of the country. This is about reasonable and realistic mobility according to the individual circumstances and the needs of the service. And it's just trying to introduce some higher level of flexibility into our contracts. We clearly aren't going to change everybody's individual contracts, so the bulk of staff won't be affected. But where we get promotion, it seems sensible to do that. But of course, and I've worked in organisations that have had routinely flexibility in their contracts, you have to exercise that reasonably and you have to do it in consultation with the individuals involved. So I hope that's my response to that question. On the Scottish referendum, I think a huge amount of work is going on. This is a good example of cross-government working. Most of that work is going on to ensure that when Scottish people come to vote, they are clearly and fully informed about the implications of the two options, yes or no here. And that's, I think, the focus of the work at the moment, and in particular to put across this government's view, which is that we're better off as a union. Clearly, if there is a vote for independence, then there'll be a lot of work to do thereon in, and we'll need to be ready for that. But at this stage, I think the focus of government rightly is on ensuring the arguments are well put and the government's case is well understood.
Okay, thank you, Bob. I think we have time for a few more questions. Has anyone got a microphone? Yes, someone out at the back.
Sue Houston from Department for Business Innovation and Skills. So Bob, you made a commitment, a very brave one I feel, on IT and all of us having flexible and efficient IT by 2015. I do look forward to that. My own department are introducing a new contract next year. The concern I have is that we all continue, or appear to continue, to do this in isolation in different departments. And I do wonder whether there's more that can be done to share best practice and to have a more common system across the whole of Whitehall. I appreciate that's a very big ask, but it's a concern that I do have.
Okay, so a question there about IT. Can we be more joined up across government departments? Is there another question to... Oh, possibly one. Yes, two at the front here, actually.
Thank you. Ruth Stoker from London Pension Centre, Newcastle Pension Centre, apologies. I was lucky enough to attend an inspiring presentation from the talent management programme. And really my question is, what opportunities do you see in the future when really all we're talking about is downsizing and cutting costs?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I didn't quite hear the last bit of the question.
Sorry, shall I do the... It's you've been to see the talent management programme, which is about developing admin grades and as it were, developing the managers and leaders of the future. So at a time of reducing costs, what opportunities are there, I guess, for people in those
That's
grades
right, yeah.
at that level?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Should we take a third, because there's one very close by, and then if you can do three at once, that would be great. Yeah.
Hello, I'm from HMRC. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how we will measure the success of the introduction of the new government change framework, introducing more competition and moving away from preferred suppliers, especially around IT.
Okay.
Yep. So two about IT and one about opportunities.
Yeah. On the first question on IT, I think you make a really good point. I think it has been done in isolation, and I think we've had some pretty uneven results from that, it has to be said. Some IT contracts have gone very well, and some have been pretty troublesome. I think that would be a way of describing it. We're not moving completely to one way of doing it through one contract, and I think that would be a big change. But we are trying to learn from each of the processes. There's a strengthened team now working out of the Cabinet Office that's doing much more of the joining up across departments on IT. So when you go out to secure a new supplier, you've got really good information about how suppliers have performed in other departments, how to construct your contracts and so on. So I think we're moving in that area to a more unified approach. But I think there's a case potentially for going further. So maybe in future, because you only do these big contract renewals once every 4 or 5 years, that you have an expert resource that you draw on when you come for your contract renewal. That's an option we're exploring at the moment. So that team builds up a body of knowledge about how best to do these big IT procurements. So you're absolutely right. I think we're going a bit further now in getting it joined up. And yes, it is an ambitious commitment I've made there. But I do think we've got to focus in on raising our game on this area, really. As I said earlier, the jobs we do are challenging enough not to be frustrated by the IT that we use. That's a basic kind of principle for me. And so we've got to really put a lot of effort behind improving that. And just take up the question from HMRC. I think what we should get out of the new approach, I think, is more consistency, much more kind of much strengthened management of suppliers. I think we've frankly been a bit weak on that in the past. We've let some of them off the hook, and I think we should have a much more robust approach to that. And by the way, I don't start with any presumption that the private sector always gets it right and we get it wrong. It's not the case. I've done both. I've done things in-house and I've done them externally. And some of the internal ones have been poor, and some have been brilliant, and some of the external ones have been poor, and some have been brilliant. It's absolutely how you procure the service and how crucially you manage it once you've got a provider in. And those are the things we've got to get better at. And on the point about talent, I mentioned earlier that we're going to be launching a talent development program later on in July. But actually, I think there's some really good talent development programs in departments. I went up to Bathgate to see what was going on at HMRC, and there was some brilliant work going on with frontline staff and with managers. So I think the key to it is to get the new performance management system working well, identify those who are willing and up for and able to benefit from investment in more development, and then for each one of them having clear courses and programs that will develop their talent. And I think in that way we can both achieve the smaller, which will mean fewer staff, but the stronger as well, and it will be a better civil service because there will be more opportunity for those with the appetite to get on to do so.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. And I think in answer to the question about where are the opportunities, you just have to look at demographics. So I won't be the leader of DEFRA forever, by definition. I'll have to move on, retire, go to another job or whatever. I always think it's incumbent on all civil servants to be constantly thinking about bringing on and developing their future successors. So I think there is scope for the managers and the futures of tomorrow. Okay. Now, I think we're okay for time. If there are any further questions, any more hands? Yeah, a gentleman in the middle of the row. Any Anyone else hanging on to a mic, desperate to ask a question? Oh, lady in the purple shirt again. So we'll just take these two, because I think we're due to finish at 15:15 to let you go on to other sessions. So, gentlemen.
Thank you. David Wilford from DEFRA. Thank you very much, Sir Bob, for your presentation. And in it you mentioned that the move, obviously, with the civil service reform is for us to be smaller and stronger. Do you envisage changes then to the number of departments that there are in government, with functions possibly merging?
Okay. So a question about how many departments are we going to need in the future? Should we have fewer? And the lady in the purple shirt?
Sorry, I just wanted to come back to my earlier question. It sounded like the only way HMRC's programme will be held to account is by regular conversations. Are there going to be any implications for the department if it isn't performing according to its improvement plan? If so, what are they?
Okay, so what happens if it doesn't perform? It's an interesting question that could apply to lots of us. Okay, Bob.
Right, first question on the number of departments. Now, I quite like this job, so I'm not going to volunteer there'll be fewer government departments and fewer ministers. I might be a short-lived one. But seriously, on your question, I think that's a matter for the Prime Minister and for the coalition to decide whether it has fewer departments. So far, that's not been their ambition or wish. What I think is more likely to happen is what I was touching on earlier, which is bringing together of shared services across departments. So if I can give you an illustration, internal audit now, a relatively small service, for quite a few departments now, for 10 of the smaller departments, we have a common internal audit service. So I don't run the internal audit service in CLG. It's run by a team working out of BIS who I employ to do my internal audit. I think DEFRA moving in similar directions. Similarly, on shared services, the IT, the so-called transactional finance services, payments and so on, we're going to have shared units doing that sort of thing. We're going to have a single legal service, and I could go on. And I think over time, the way we will handle smaller departments is to move for greater efficiencies in the way we organise the support services by bringing them together across departments. Now, that may or may not be enough to drive it, and at some point, a future government may look at merger of departments. But at the moment, the big focus is on bringing together the support functions that underpin departments rather than merging departments themselves. Just on your question about performance, there's a lot more than regular conversations, and my apologies if I gave that impression. All the big projects are subject to kind of rigorous review now through the Major Projects Authority, through what we call gateways at each stage of their development. And it's those reviews that will feed into my regular meetings with the department. But alongside that, there will be regular performance data produced, which will be considered by the department and by its non-executives. And the non-executives play a key role here, particularly in HMRC, looking at the performance data on probably a monthly basis and reviewing how it's going. So there'll be a lot of tracking and accountability, both within departments and within HMRC, and to myself and indeed to ministers. It won't just be about conversations, it'll be very much based on what the evidence is telling us. Shall I just finish, as it's the last question we're going to take, by saying thank you for all the work you do for the civil service, and I hope you get a really good enjoyment out of the rest of the event today.
Okay, and could I say thank you on behalf of everyone here to Sir Bob for coming along to talk to us, to reflect on 1 year on, and also to answer so many varied questions. Thank you.
Thank you.